What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and today we're going to be taking a look at some of the biggest pots I've played against Negreanu. In fact, our top 5 biggest pots, as well as a few pots that I selected that you guys might want to see. And you know what? I'm feeling pretty nice, so we'll look at a couple hole cards I had and some hands that did not go to showdown. Now, before we get started, a few things I want to talk about. First, you might recognize that I am not at my normal video desk. Normally, that's where my video desk is, but that has turned into a monitoring station so that if we have any worries about cheating, we can check the tapes and we can see that this was a legitimately played session. Negreanu has the same situation installed, so not that I think either one of us think that there would be cheating, but in today's day and age, it's always good just to be safe. And then, if someone does feel like they want to check the tape or they think something strange is going on, then obviously they can do so. So that's the first thing. Next up, I have a pretty exciting thing to announce. You might have seen it over on Twitter already, but if this tweet gets to 25,000 retweets, I am going to stream a session and show some hole cards. Now, I just can't show every hand, guys. I know you want that. I know that would be fun, but the problem there is I'm a human being. I'm going to have leaks in my play, and then Daniel's team can dissect them, and they can kind of come after me in some of the spots where I'm showing weakness. So can't do that. But I can show you some hands as we go along. We can do a few play-alongs. Of course, I can show you some river spots when I'm either jamming or considering a call or whatever I'm doing. So we will show some hands. It should be fun. But I will have to keep my cards covered for most of it. Either way, if you guys want to see that happen, head over to Twitter, hit that retweet button, and you can make it happen to see a streamed session of this challenge. Should be a fun one. And then finally, before we jump into the hands, I do want to say that Upswing Poker is having its Black Friday sale ending today, Cyber Monday. So if you want to head over to Upswing Poker and get a course, everything is 25% off, and you can learn to play like me. So one day, maybe you can be winning your own 200, 400 heads up challenge versus Daniel Negreanu. Not likely, but you have to start somewhere. All right, let's go ahead on that note and jump into some hands against Daniel Negreanu. All right, this is hand number 5, coming in at $105,000, 105.9. This is probably the most standard. In fact, this is probably the only really standard hand of the top 5. I 3-bet queens. Negreanu decides to 4-bet. I jam. He has tens. I mean, this isn't really anything that's too crazy. Um, Tens is a hand where you gain a lot of value by 4-betting. You deny a bunch of equity, and you're definitely going to be ahead of the flatting continue range. Doesn't really have a lot of good trapping properties. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and explain to you why pocket tens is good to get in for 125 big blinds, but definitely a standard play. And we get the hold. Not too much to see on this one. Coming in number 4 is a hand from a more recent session. This one was interesting. There's some interesting stuff to think about. But let's just go ahead and jump into it. So 6-4 suit, obviously standard open. We face a 3-bet from Negreanu. He's used a bunch of different 3-bet sizes over the course of this match. He tends to have like a specific one he opens the session with. He went through a phase where he was doing some larger 3-bets, some like 4.8x size 3-bets. He went through a phase he was doing a bit of smaller 3-bets. I think there was some 4.2 to 4.4 in there. Lately, he's been doing 4.5. I've kind of had to just prepare for all of these things, know where my cutoff points are. I can't get too into the weeds on what I'm planning on doing, but 6-4 suited is going to be a pretty standard defend here against a 3-bet. I think 4-betting could be a reasonable option. Some of the time you want to mainly be calling though for sure. And if 3-bets get too large, you can actually consider folding some hands like 6-4 suited. I'm not saying you should fold here, but we're not outrageously far away from the point where you could be looking to maybe lay a hand like this down every now and then. Okay, we do make the call. Jack 10-6 checks to mate. So this is an interesting board. Jack 10 boards overall, a lot going on. Obviously, if he has any of the overcard hands, ace, king, ace, queen, king, queen, he's got either gutters or an open ender to the nuts. So that's obviously good for him. Also, he's way more likely to have hands like jacks or tens. I'm going to be 4-betting those pre. So, realistically on this board, the big blind has way more of these strong draws and nutted type hands. But imposition does have a lot of playability. We've got a bunch of straight draws on both sides. Of course, he can have ace, queen, king, queen, but so can we. We can also have queen nine suited. We can have 9-8 suited. We can have a plethora of gut shots. Really, basically all the gut shots here, other than ace, king, Unless we wanted to once in a while trap that pre-flop, if you catch my drift. So really the question kind of becomes, how do we construct our bet range when he does decide to check? How much checking should he be doing? And a big part of this board is, what size is Negreanu looking to play here? Is he, he's got a few different sizes. He uses out of position some of these spots. Earlier on in the sessions, he was doing either 20% or 75%. Lately, I've been seeing some 40%. So some of these boards get a little bit strange, right? Because let's just say that he was either just going 75% or check here. Well, then his check can have a lot of good hands that would be trapping, hands like sets, hands like Jack 10, hands like even a Jack. Like if you're going to use a big size on the flop here, Queen Jack needs to check some, Jack 9 needs to check some. If he was using a strategy here with lots of tiny bets, then his check is usually going to be a little more weak, but he's not going to be checking nearly as often. And so this is kind of an interesting spot, and like this is where you kind of have to figure out as a poker player, again talking about Negreanu here, what strategy do I want to be using? Because sometimes if you look at different strategies and different boards, the value can be very similar between a big bet strategy or a small bet strategy or a split, some big bet, some small bet. That's obviously better than both of those. It's just harder to do. What sizes make sense? There's so many different things you can do. And then the other part of this is there's, 1,755 different flops, right? So so you have to think about all of these things, and then you have to think about what's the best size. You think about how many boards there are. All of this goes into planning out your flop strategy. So we have a pretty good idea here when Negreanu does check that he's going to be using some small bets. I think he would be using a few big bets as well, and then also some checks. It's tough to balance that. It is definitely the right play. It's a play that I use on some boards too, but it can be difficult to balance out all of those ranges. Um, so anyway, Jack 10-6 rainbow. Negreanu does decide to check, and I've got 6-4 spades here. It's an interesting spot on the flop. I think like you can see some pretty solid merit towards both betting and checking. If you bet, you put your opponent in some tough spots with some hands that either are beating you or have a lot of equity against you. If he has a hand like eights, if he has a hand like ace king, if he has a hand like ace six suited or something of that nature, a lot of those hands are gonna feel some pressure versus a bet. And additionally, you can set up some spots where you can barrel when you hit two pair trips or backdoor flushes or whatever else. But if you bet these hands too much, then you put yourself in a spot where your opponent can start check raising you a lot. So the question kind of becomes, how much can I bet and get away with before I'm simply just betting too often here? And so I'm going to be betting here some of the time. Again, I can't get. I'm trying to give as much info as I can without getting too into the weeds. We go for a very small size. When we do bet here, again, you can pick different strategies. One of the cool things about a really small bet here is it forces your opponent to defend a bunch of weak hands. It forces them to have to worry about their checks. It forces them to have to think about check raising you some. It puts a lot of pressure on them. And just because you're using a small size doesn't mean you're going to be betting here a ton. Obviously, if we bet this small, we're going to bet more than if we use a big size. But it's really more we're just trying to put pressure on a lot of different parts of our opponent's range when he does do bet and then check. Negreanu does make the check call, turns a queen, and he checks. And well, let's just talk about this spot. So this is a weird spot because obviously the big blind can have ace king, but the small blind is much more likely to have hands like king 9, 9, 8. So it's a bit weird because obviously the big blind has the nuts, a chunk, but a lot of those hands should either bet or check raise. And then of course, he also has many, many other hands out of the nuts here. He could have ace queen. He could have king queen. He could have queen nine. He could have ace jack. He could have ace jack's not that likely. He's probably not taking that line with ace jack. But he could have, um, jack nine. He could have queen eight of spades occasionally, although that probably mainly bets the flop. He could have 10-9. He could have pocket nines. He could have ace 10. He could have king 10. So you can see here, even though obviously he can have the nuts, this isn't a spot that we can get super, super scared on. And I think this is a good rule in heads up, and maybe even just poker in general, although it more specifically applies to heads up. You can't just get really afraid of your opponent having ace king because there's so many other hands that they can have. You want to try and attack all different parts of their range. So again, a very interesting spot 6-4, and I think you could make some good arguments both ways. If we bet this hand too much, we're just devastated by getting check raised, and he should have some check raises here. He can check raise with a set or ace king or king nine when he has it occasionally. Um, so again, this is the kind of hand that has some properties that like betting. You obviously can improve to a vector flush. You can obviously improve to two pair or trips. You obviously can knock him off of some equity. If he does check fold a hand like 10-8 of diamonds here, that's pretty great for you, right? So a lot of things kind of going both ways. We decided to end up betting the turn. Um, we go for a bigger size. This is a size kind of setting up for a river jam. A lot of different sizes that you can choose to use in position. Um, Typically speaking, when you're saying you have a really good hand, you want to use bigger sizes. And you're saying you have like maybe a good hand, maybe a thinner hand, you use smaller sizes. Here we're basically saying, okay, man, we have a good hand. We have a straight, we have a set, we have a two pair, we have a kind of hand that's looking to put some money in the pot, and we're going to occasionally have some bluffs. We're occasionally going to have some flush draws. We could occasionally have a hand like maybe king eight of spades here, a hand like king eight of hearts here. Might occasionally want to put some pressure on like this too. So um, plenty of plenty of hands that we can choose from to bluff with. I will say one last thing there, though. You do want to be careful with hands like king eight of spades, because even though that's obviously a very, very nice draw, a lot of times very nice draws on the turn are going to want to check back and realize their equity and not get check raised. If you did bet king eight, you got check raised, it's kind of a disaster. However, you do need to bet it sometimes. So there's obviously some pretty advanced concepts going on there with balancing it out. We do go for the bet, and he decides to check call. And I mean, this is just a skillfully maneuvered masterclass of a river. If this is honestly, guys, if you're gonna play at the high stakes one day, you're gonna really need to harness this skill, which is successfully backdooring flushes and huge pots. It's an essential part of a good, solid, sound strategy. And if you want to learn more about that strategy, I'd recommend heading over to upswingpoker.com. Black Friday sale going on right now. 25% off all courses. You too can learn that backdooring flushes is good. We decide to jam the river. I don't think there's really any debate here. We sized up the turn. It's under pot. We have a flush. I think the real more interesting part is what hands would we bluff with, and some of the hands we mentioned on turn can make reasonable river bluffs. Obviously, it's nice to have a spade here if you can. Hard to have too many spade hands. You could have a hand maybe like if ace eight with a spade, decide to take a turn shot. And that hand actually does kind of make some sense on the turn, although would mainly check. You're still going to be looking for spade blockers to bluff this situation. So we do jam back over to Negreanu. He does make the call, and he has the ace king with a spade, which is very brutal for Negreanu. There's not much else to say here. I mean, the thing about ace king is he should bet the flop some. He should check raise the flop occasionally. He should check raise the turn sometimes, but with the ace of spades, it is a kind of nice check call hand. I don't know, guys. There's not really much I can say. I think he played his hand fine. The most important thing for him is to recognize that you need to take all these different kinds of lines with ace king. But I mean, what are you going to do? This is just simply a cooler for Negreanu. Okay, let's move on to hand three. Moving on to our next hand, we're going to be looking at the third largest pot that we played. This one comes in at $111.4 thousand. Sizable, healthy portion of a pot. Here we open queen six suited. Negreanu does go for his 3-bet, and we decide to call. Again, a kind of hand that could be looking to 4-bet sometimes. Calling's fine too. We get a very good flop. He bets small. And this is a very good board for the 3-betting player. You're going to have like occasionally a deuce. You could have ace deuce suited. You could have maybe some 3 deuce suited or 4 deuce suited. But really the deuce is kind of dead for both players. You're not really, either player's not really going to have a deuce. So the question kind of becomes, do you have a king or not? If you have a king, you have the kind of hand that can put all of the money in. If you don't, you do not have a hand that can put all the money in. And there are not a lot of kings out there. This is a very advanced concept. There are not lots of top pair. Who knew? No one knew. Negreanu does decide to go for his small flop size. I think this is good here. This is a board you're going to want to bet a lot as the 3-better. Simply speaking, if the small blind has hands like 8-7 of clubs, you just have to fold. They're not really, can't really do anything. They're kind of handcuffed. It's a good board for the re-raiser. you have to fold. This is excellent sizing from Negreanu. Um, and now with Queen Six of Hearts, this is a board where you can start to mix in a few raises, but it's not a board you're going to want to have a ton of raises on. It's a more static board that is good for the three better. In spots like that, you want to play more of your range as a call, and we decide to go ahead and do that. The turn is an ace, and this is where the hand starts to get a little spicy. He goes for the 75% turn barrel here, and I've thought a lot about this hand, and I've looked at it in the solver. I should have probably looked at all of these in the solver beforehand, but I didn't want to be told that my 6-4 was bad, so I didn't look. And this is really an interesting spot. I feel like so. I talked about this in a post game interview here on the channel after one of the sessions. But what's kind of weird to me about the 75% bet size here from Negreanu is that he's saying that he has kind of an ace or better. But the problem with an ace can definitely bet the size for value on the turn, no question. But if an ace decides to jam the river or bet large on the river, what hands is it really getting called by that it beats? Now, it's not to say that it loses very often. I don't think that it does. It loses to some very rare combos. One's the combo ace deuce suited, one combo of deuces, some occasional hands, ace x that two pair the river. Once in a while, maybe a pre-flop trap, stuff like that. But overall, I don't think he does lose. But I don't think he can get that much value either because this turn is overall it's good for the re-raiser. They have more ace x than the small one usually does. But the small blind has all kinds of ace highs. You're not going to get to fold ace high for this flop size. So I can simply just call down with an ace and fold a king on the river, um, and be fine. I'm not going to have to worry about it. In fact, I could probably even start folding a few kings on the turn if I really feel like um, this is either value heavy or I want to, get a few kings out of my range. Maybe some particularly bad kings could fold the turn. So the question is, how great is this bet with an ace? And I think it's not amazing. Um, it's okay, but I don't think that it's amazing. Because of this, I think that when he bets the turn, if he wants to go big, he should be betting with hands like ace king. He should be betting with hands like ace deuce suited or three deuce. Um, Maybe an occasional hand like kings. I think that those hands make way more sense. And if you have hands like that, I think you actually want to go a little bit bigger. So I think a bigger size would be a bit better. Or a smaller size. I don't actually like a small size. I said that earlier. I don't think I like a small size. I think I like a bigger size, represent a thin range, mainly check, and go for it with those kinds of holdings. But Negreanu does play his turn out at 75. So this is what we were talking about kind of on the last hand, where sometimes you have to just roll with your strategy, even though in a specific spot maybe it's not as good as something else. If Negreanu's framework is this is how I use it, this is a spot where I use this size, then he needs to use that size, even if maybe it's not perfect. And I think that that's a good way to approach the game. I think trying to just find the best size in every possible spot, it can be good if you're, really familiar with the spots and you put in a lot of work and you really understand them. But if you don't, it puts you in a spot where you're very exploitable. And Negreanu knows if I bet 75 here, I'm going to bet 75 with my other hands. So he knows in this situation that he's not putting himself in a spot where he's going to be exploitable, at least from like me looking at his bet size thing, because there's a chance if Negreanu starts to just use lots of different random bet sizes all over the place, I get reads and I get tells. And in a challenge, that can be very damning because if I do say, oh yeah, when he uses the whatever size, it seems value heavy or bluffy or whatever it is, and that ends up being consistent, then when I have hands that are very close between options, I can take a decision that I think more makes more money because of these reads that he's giving me. So anyway, putting all that stuff to the side, size is at least reasonable. And then I think in my hand, I just have a clear call. I don't really see any way around it. If he's bluffing, I'm crushing him. Obviously, I have a draw to a very strong hand. Yeah, I mean, there's not really anything to say here. And again, guys, if you want to learn how to river flushes, I would recommend heading over to upswingpoker.com. Black Friday sale going on. Learn how to hit a flush on the river from your boy, Doug Polk, where I'll teach you the keys to a fifth of the suit coming in on the river for a six-figure pot. Absolutely essential. I'd recommend checking it out in the very near future. Anyway, flush, he goes all in. Personally, I'm a big flush fan. I love river running flushes. I do make the call. It is a bit of an overbet, and this hand got a little bit of chatter in the online streets. Negreanu shows up with the Jack 4. I did run this hand, and my hand was standard. There was not really that much interesting about it. And a lot of hands and heads up are standard. Either you get stacked into standard or you're bluffing in a standard, and it's fine. Really, the money is made in heads up with the hands that are not standard or are close. And I think when I look at this Jack 4, the issue really is the turn. The flop is fine. Pre-flop is a little aggressive. I don't know how often he's re-raising it though. If it's low frequency, it's fine. Flop is good. Turn is where things really kind of get a little bit wild. I just cannot see this hand being the kind of hand that you want to bet. I just can't really see it. I mean, it's better to have a heart. It's obviously better to have two hearts. It's better to have a wheel draw. It's better to have Jack 10. It's better to have Queen 10. It's better to have Queen Jack. It's better to have. I mean, there are many hands. I can keep going. Um, there are many, many, many hands it's worse to have here. Or sorry, it's better to have here. It would be worse to have like maybe like Jack 9 of spades, you know. So it's not the worst possible hand that I can think of, but it's just not getting in the mix. And I ran this hand and it's just a pure turn check. There's just no I can't sugarcoat this. There's just a turn check. What I can say is I think that Negreanu is trying to make sure that he barrels me enough in the right spots. And maybe he feels like, he hasn't been doing that in the past, and so he wants to try and find some better spots to run it on me. And so this is more of like a play trying to balance out his frequencies. And I will say when I look back at how I used to play back in my prime, guys, back in my heyday, I did lean more towards trying to find the right frequencies and the perfect hands because it's a much bigger mistake to have bad frequencies than to have the the wrong hands. But that said, this is just not a hand you want to have. It's just not. Anyway, he does bet. I call river. I think his river play is actually fine. I looked it up. Normally, you don't want to bluff too often when you hit pairs, but it actually was fine here, and it kind of makes sense, right? Like if Negreanu checks the river, it's not going check check with him winning. I'm either going to jam and he's going to have to fold, or I'm going to check and I'm going to win. There's no check check for a four wins. There's just no hand. There's no hand I can have. What hand am I going to be calling turn with to check back the river that a four beats? Pocket threes? Not happening. Queen jack? If I call down, I'm going to jam the river. So I think jamming the four is, and it's subtle because sometimes you can river pairs and they can win like once in a while, right? Like if this is an offsuit four, he needs to check. I mean, I didn't run that, but I'm pretty sure he needs to check because he could potentially win. Maybe I have like Queen Jack of Hearts and check back. Maybe he wins once in a blue moon. But here he just straight up never wins, so it's not nearly as bad. Um, but this is an overbet. It's 133% pot, roughly. I just I think the river's okay. But my worry is for Negreanu, if he's betting this on the turn, he might be betting just a crap load of hands. And if he's just running it here, this is not like an amazing bluff spot. I can have flushes, I can have aces. Yeah, if I have king jack of diamonds, I'm going to just hate my life and fold the river, right? So he would definitely own me. Or if I had king jack of clubs, or something like that. But I don't have that here because he has the jack of clubs. So this was just a little bit too aggressive. I like the river more than the turn. He can have some flushes on the river. He can have some of the other value bets that were mentioned before, but I think this one was just a little bit too ambitious. Actually, before we move on to the next hand, I want to say one last thing. This is another reason why you can see the value in occasionally trapping some hands like aces to three bet. If I had four bet a hand like aces in this situation, he's just simply always folding. So when you do trap hands to aces, I know a lot of people hate the idea of doing that because you let your opponent get there or whatever the kind of classic logic is. But you can sort of see the value that it can create in some spots where you might get a guy barreling super aggressively on a board you have locked up that you wouldn't have made otherwise. So just want to make that one last point before we jump into the next hand. On to hand number two, and we are not making great time, but I'll still talk about this one, and then we'll look at least one or two hands that are not in the top five before we move into the final hand. But let's talk about this one because this one was one that I think a lot of people talked about early on. Uh, let's just take a gander. So we are a bit deeper in this hand, 155 to start. This is a $129,000 pot. Spoiler alert, these are all going to be all-ins. Who would have thought in the biggest pot video that they would be all-ins? No one knew. No one knew how big the all-in pots would be. All right, so we decided to 4-bet the Queen Jack facing a 3-bet. This is the kind of play you want to make sometimes, guys. You want to be able to 4-bet hands like Queen Jack, but you can't do it too much. It needs to just be done once in a while. Basically, when you're looking at 4-betting, uh, you want to be able to 4-bet and you want to be able to 4-bet aggressively, but you don't want to be doing it so much that they can just print by 5-betting you, right? So, or if they call, they know you have too many bluffs, whatever is going on post flop. So you need to be picking out the right frequencies. Queen Jack offsuit should be the hand that does it a low amount. It's not something that you want to be doing a ton, especially if you're looking to once in a while trap other hands pre-flop. You're gonna have to make sure that your right frequency makes sense considering that. Here we do decide to go for a large 4-bet. Back over to Negreanu. Does make the call. And Negreanu's range here should be pretty strong. It shouldn't really have too many hands that are at the top. He should be occasionally trapping hands like aces, but he, should mainly be jamming hands like kings, queens are gonna be high frequency jams. Ace king's gonna be high frequency jam, and then he's gonna have a lot of middling pairs, suited broadways, some ace queen offs, some ace jack offs probably here as well. And then maybe once in a while you can have some suited connectors like 10-9 suited, 9-8 suited. Those kinds of hands could make sense. Oh, and you could also have some suited wheel aces like ace 5, ace 4 suited make some sense here too. Um, as well as other suited aces like ace 9, ace 8 suited. So I know we've listed a lot of hands, but forward pots are strange because the out-of-position player's range is kind of face up, and the in-position player's range is obviously a bit more polar, but has some more scattered in hands that can 4-bet. Whereas, Negreanu is a hand that can put in 32 big blinds pre-flop. That's not a ton of hands that can do that. So just things to be thinking about as we reach the flop. Flop comes ace 8-4, two spades. This is going to be a board that in position wants to bet quite often when the big blind does check. It's cool to work in some checks here too, with some hands that especially don't like betting, like kings or like a weak suited ace. Hands like that can be good. Maybe aces every now and again. But you're going to mainly be looking to bet this flop with a lot of hands. The reason is simple. If you're bluffing with an ace x hand pre-flop, you hit top pair. If you have ace king, you flop top pair type kicker. So you're gonna have a bunch of aces in this spot that are gonna want to value bet and are gonna want to barrel. Maybe you have eights once in a while as well. Although on this stack depth, you might 4-bet it a little bit less often. So he checks. We go for our standard size. You do want to be c-betting small and 4-bet pots. Not really too much to talk about there. Basically, offering yourself a very good price, but it allows you to thin value with a lot of hands. There's a bunch of reasons why small is good. We don't need to get too far into it. And Negreanu does decide the check call. Turns an ace. Negreanu checks once again. And this is where things start to get pretty interesting. So, this turn is interesting because the big blind is now way less likely to have an ace because first off, sometimes they should raise the flop with an ace, and second off, now there are two aces on the board. And this is another advanced tip, but when two of the same card are out there, your opponent is less likely to have that card. And if you want to learn more about strategies like that, you can head over to Upswing Poker. No, I'm just kidding. But no, it's true. It's very true. There's two aces out. He's less likely to have an ace. Negreanu does check once again. So the question kind of becomes, how am I going to want to play my top hands? And I think if I have an ace in this spot, I'm looking to just bet jam. I don't think that there's too much logic in checking. I think if you have some of your weakest aces, you could check once in a blue moon. Maybe if I had a hand like ace 8, or I'm totally locked up, definitely going to be looking to throw in some checks. If I had ace and I did bet the flop, I'm going to be checking the turn a lot. But if I have a hand like ace king or ace queen or ace 9 or ace 7 or any of those value bets, I'm going to be looking to barrel. And the important thing to think about here too is I have ace king a lot. Like ace king is a standard 4-bet hand. Maybe once in a while we're going to trap it, but we're almost pure re-raising that hand pre-flop. So we're going to have tons of ace king. So we get to bluff here pretty aggressively. And also on the turn, we go for a smaller size. We use a size where if we did want to value bet with some thinner hands, like maybe a hand like, tens, no spade, where we want to get some value from an eight, or we want to get some value from some flush draw hands, we have room to do that, right? So we can bet some pairs here, thinner for value. We can bet a bunch of our aces here. And then we also get to work on some bluffs. Having a spade is nice here. We block him from having flush draws they might want to call. Having queen jack is nice. You block ace queen and ace jack. Only the offsuit versions, but ace queen should be a hand he continues every time versus 4-bet, even though it's big. Ace jack is a hand that should be continuing a lot versus 4-bet, even though it's big. He could maybe let it go a little bit, but he's really going to need to continue that hand. So our hand does block a bunch of the good hands. And then I'm anticipating if he has a hand like queens, he's going to mainly be jamming a preflop. He's going to be doing possibly some jamming preflop with jacks as well. So there's good removal effects here against his good hands. There's good removal effects here. I don't think we block almost any of the folds. We block, a few. We don't block the club hands that can fold. We don't block, there's just not that many hands that basically our removal effects are good here. And we have a bunch of value, so we bet for 1/3 pot. This is not a spot you need to go with a big size because it is now a static spot, really. I mean, there's a flush draw, but look, you kind of have an ace or you don't. And if you have a flush draw, yeah, you're getting a price to call. But those rivers are going to be somewhat easy to navigate, and most of the time it's just a brick river. So we get to go small here and polar. Now the river is where things really get interesting. We river a nothing because that's how bluffs work. And the flush gets in, and we have a spade, and he checks. And this is a spot where there's a lot going on, and I don't want to pretend that I, in the moment, was 100% sure my hand was a jam, and I was definitely checking back to the river some, but there's some kind of reasonable logic here on bluffing queen jack. We talked about a lot of it on the turn. We block ace queen, we block ace jack. Those are both kind of in play. But now having a spade, for a lot of the reasons why betting the turn was good to bet with our hand, betting the river now becomes kind of good because we do block him from having a hand like king jack of spades, which is a hand that should play like this all the time. And I looked this up, actually should call a river jam. So the jack of spades does help us in that regard. And it only blocks hands that call realistically. I mean, maybe it blocks some jacks, right? Like if he has pocket jacks, uh, maybe we're blocking that. But sometimes they just pull an Alex Rowley and they just call you down anyway. So, um, you know, realistically, I think we're mainly just blocking value, and ace queen, ace jack are going to be some of the most common hands that do call. And I'm expecting him to raise those on the flop and or turn some of the time. They shouldn't just be always calling. So I think this is a spot where you just have to be willing to go for it. It's not a clean spot. It's not a standard spot. It's not a spot that I think a lot of players look to bluff in. It's obviously scary. You can definitely have an ace. I think he's the kind of guy that'll trap an ace a bunch. I'm not pumped about it. I wasn't like, yeah, in the moment, like, oh, I'm just like counting my fucking money. I just did it because I thought it was what needed to be done, and I think it was. I looked it up afterwards. I think it was pretty good. However, he did have ace queen. So sometimes you run it and you run it right into the fucking nuts, and you just gotta live with it and learn to fight another day. On to a couple hands that did not reach showdown. Here we have one that was a 3-bet pot, 3-bet king 10, 10 7 3. I think this hand's actually very interesting. I think that you could really play this in a variety of ways. I think the main lines are going to be either bet or check raise, with bet being preferred. And then once in a while you can work on a trap check call as well, but you're really going to want to mainly be betting and raising with a hand this strong. We do decide to bet. He calls, turns a 3. And this is a spot where you really just can't be afraid and heads up, guys. Like, it's just not likely they have a 3, right? Like, what 3s do they have? Ace 3 suited? Maybe 4 3 suited, depending on 3-bet size. Probably 4 3 suited. What else? This is a great card. This is a card where you should be barreling super aggressively. So we do decide to go for the 2/3 pot size. Again, like once in a while you could check this on the turn, but once you do start to use a big size, you usually want to keep betting with your good hands. He does call, and then again, what are we afraid of here? Okay, 10-9. He has 10-9, he has 10-9. 10-7 suited, ace-3 suited. These are not many hands. And then he doesn't have jack-8. He's not going to call jack-8 versus a big size turn unless it's jack-8 diamonds, one combo. 8-6, one combo. We're just not beat here. Ace-10 should mainly raise flop. So this is a spot where you really just don't want to be afraid to go for value. I know it's not like a wild hand or anything, but some concepts here that I think maybe some people that are new to heads up might not be familiar with. But yeah, you just wanna be going for value here, guys, when you have hands this strong, and make sure you're giving yourself room to have bluffs as well. We're gonna throw one last hand here that did not reach showdown that you guys might be interested in. Here it goes open with 3-bet 10-8 suited. It's very standard. He calls. King, Jack, Deuce, Rainbow. We have the backdoor flush draw. This is a hand that kind of depends on what size you're looking to go on the flop. If you're looking to go something bigger, might want to be checking a bit, but definitely a hand that you can be bluffing the flop with a decent amount of the time. It does make the call. Turns where things get kind of interesting. We have a gutter now to not the nuts, so it's not exactly our favorite draw, but we do need to have some bluffs. And this hand does check off some boxes, right? If we hit a 9, it's going to almost always be good unless he has queen 10. And we're going to need to have some hands that make sense to bet 3 with as bluffs. There are rivers, for example, like a queen or an ace. It's going to give us like a nice bluff hand. And even though it's not a hand that we might want to bet turn with too often because we don't have a spade and we block maybe some club hands that could fold, it's a kind of hand we do want to be betting a decent amount of the time, especially when there aren't too many other draws that we can have. We just had to go for the larger size. We're saying, hey, we got a good hand here. Ground does call. And I think this is just a absolutely mandatory bluff spot. You could maybe check fold it a little bit. I think like in some spots, if you're ever worried about over bluffing, it's fine. You don't have to always fire these spots, but you kind of have to fire this spot. We can have 10-9 for sure. We're going to take this line with that hand. We could have ace-10 occasionally. We can have some king-queen. We can have some king-jack. We could have some pocket sevens the way this is played. We just have too many hands here to look to, check fold this very often. Yeah, I mean, I think this hand really kind of plays itself. And we jam, yell fold a few times, get one through. And that's also why it's important to sometimes look to value bet thin in the triple spot, because you want to create space for yourself to be able to make plays like this as well. And you're not going to be able to do that if you're not also looking to value bet appropriately with your better hands. And here we go, the largest pot that has been played in the challenge thus far. It was actually one from, I think, the first session. I want to say it was the first online session. Open, we 3-bet with the pocket aces. He does decide to make the call. And we have an 8-8-5 flop. So 8-8 paired flops are kind of weird in 3-bet pots. Basically, there are a couple different kinds of paired flops. There are paired flops where the small blind has a lot of trips, and then there are ones where they don't. And this board kind of looks like he would, right? But he kind of doesn't. A lot of offsuit 8s can't call the 3-bet. So it's not a board that the small blind actually has that many good hands on. You can have ace-8, you can have a bunch of suited 8s, but suited combos aren't really that many combos, and he's going to have to call hands like jack-10, queen-10, queen-jack, king-10, a bunch of ace-x hands. So this is not a board that you want to be playing too conservatively on. As you get deeper, you need to work in some more checks, but it's a board you're certainly going to be looking to find some c-bets on as well. We just had to go for half pot. Negreanu calls. And this is where things get a little spicy. We turn the nut boat. Obviously, quad still beats us. So the situation on the turn, I saw some other people analyze this hand too, and I thought all of that analysis was good. If you're going to trap an overpair on the turn, it's really you're going to trap this overpair specifically, because having the ace of hearts means he can't have the nut flush draw, which is always going to call turn. Nut flush draw isn't calling turn because it loves its flush draw. It's calling turn because it's very far ahead of the bluffs. It just simply has to call turn. So you don't really want to barrel with the ace of hearts. We need no protection. Obviously, all of the lower pairs, overpairs, prefer betting over this one. So if this hand is, if you're going to trap in this spot, it's going to be a trap with this hand. But it's not always a trap. And that's the thing, like in these situations, just because the main line is a check, it doesn't mean that you don't also want to sometimes be betting. The trick, of course, as a human being is figuring out in the session, what frequency am I doing both, right? Did I trap enough on the turn here? Only I'll ever know that. but you do need to be mixing between both options in some of these situations, and also recognizing that this hand is the best overpair to trap really on the turn. In fact, I mean this hand is better to trap than an 8 because when you have an 8, you don't block any of the ace high hands that can be calling or the pair hands that can be calling. Um, so when you have an 8, he's not going to be betting as often when you check, right? Because he can have an ace high that wants to show down. But when you have aces, he's way less likely to have ace high. And whether he has a bluff or a lower pair or an 8, obviously you're going to get stacked. But regardless, he's going to be betting much more often when you do decide to check. All those things said, this is still a bet sometimes, and the size you want to bet in this spot is very large. And I think that this kind of makes sense. Like, look, if you have an 8, you have an 8. It's just simple. You have an 8, I'm getting stacked. We That's just the way this game works. If people hit quads when you have aces, you get stacked. Just kind of the name of the game. So the question is, how do I play by range the best knowing that? And large sizes are great here because if he does have a hand like ace high or a 5, or even like maybe a king high like king queen if he wants to float that, maybe king jack of hearts, things like that, the size that really puts him in a tough spot is a big one. Because if he has those hands, he realizes, oh, Doug's saying he's got, nines plus. Doug's saying he has nines plus here. Um, and he does a lot of the time have those hands, but he can also be bluffing. He can have a hand like 10-9 or jack 10 or ace deuce suited or king 6 suited, or there's a bunch of other hands that might want to decide to bluff here as well. So essentially, when I bet this turn, by using a big size, I get to bluff more, and I also allow myself room to win stacks when I have these overpairs that are going to want to try to win stacks. We decide to bet the full size of the pot. He calls, and the river is a 9. Again, I think if you were going to trap a hand, maybe this would make sense. I don't love it on the river. I think the turn, it makes sense to do some checking. On the river, if you were going to trap something, this does make sense once in a while. But usually once you use a big size on the turn, you kind of want to keep firing. And it makes more sense to trap with a hand like, let's say you had the 10-9 or the 9-7 or the, hands like that probably make a little more sense to trap. We do jam pot, he calls, and he had the 9-7 of clubs. And this hand was, when I saw it at first, I thought that it was quite bad. And then I looked at it and I ran the sim, and it's actually not as bad as it seems. So he has the best 9-7 he can have here because I can't have 9-8 of clubs or 8-7 of clubs. And then also, I'm more likely to triple barrel with some of the hands that have a 7 or a 9. So he blocks me from tripling my bluffs, which is a weird concept. And then also, he needs some floats that can bluff jam when check do, right? Because if he doesn't have hands like this, when he jams on the river, he's not going to have enough bluffs. So it's the kind of play that I think you need to make every now and then. Now, if he was just always calling on the turn, that's obviously bad. It's way too much 9-7. But, 5, 10, 15%, something like that, I think his play is fine. The issue is that if he was just pure calling the turn, then he's just losing a lot with that play. And it's similar to kind of the Jack 4 hand, where it was like, okay, the Jack 4, if he wasn't getting out of line with other hands, Jack 4 is fine. But if he is, it gets bad. And that's why it's tough to know when you look at just one hand, like what someone's strategy is. How good or bad is it? I don't know. It could be reasonable. Could be fine. Could be terrible. You just don't know based on one showdown what it says about their overall strategy. That's going to do it here from me. This was a long one. I wasn't planning on going on for so long, but I was enjoying talking about some of the hands. And, I got in the mix and I was enjoying doing it. So I hope you guys enjoyed that breakdown, the top 5 pots, a couple pots as well that didn't reach showdown. So you guys can see the whole cards in that. And just to close out here, remember that I might be streaming my whole cards in the near future. And also, this is the last day to take advantage of the Upswing Poker 25% off sale. To improve your poker game, head on over to upswingpoker.com. All right, guys, thank you for joining. I'll see you again soon. Hopefully live, maybe with some cards. We'll find out. Peace.